have been many harms caused by the COVID pandemic and the ensuing lockdown. And one of the harms that we all experience is the amount of animosity and arguing and plain unkindness that goes on social media between people who disagree and people who might have their own ideas of what to do or what it means or any of the above. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to revisit a talk on kindness that I gave on an earlier show, just to remember what's really important and why. That in the end, it's not about who's right and what's right, but it's really about how we treat each other. The Dalai Lama famously said, "My religion is very simple. My religion is kindness." The Dalai Lama is really saying spiritual practice is not necessarily about spiritual things, it's about people. I often talk about the Stoics on this show. One of the great Stoic philosophers, Seneca, said, "Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness." Basically saying it's the first step of our actions. And Marcus Aurelius, the author of the Meditations, says that human beings have come into the world for the sake of one another. So either instruct them or endure them patiently, he says. If you can, show them the error of their ways. But if you cannot, remember that kindness was granted to you for this purpose. He says the gods themselves are kind to such people and even help them to achieve external things, such as health, wealth, and reputation. That's how kind the gods are. You are capable of the same kindness, if you want. What's stopping you? And those words from, nearly 2,000 years ago are just as relevant today as they were in the world of ancient Rome. Kindness is something that we are essentially all capable of. Even though we sometimes are portrayed as or see ourselves as a kind of violent and dangerous species, and we definitely are, Darwin, the Darwin, the one who studied evolution, actually, he didn't think so. And he said that it's not that we are entirely self-interested, but that we are actually a social species. And as a social species, we are a caring species. And so he says that sympathy and caring are instinctual, just as much as sometimes more dangerous acts might seem instinctual. Caring for others is instinctual. And indeed, today we know that science even shows us that when we devote resources to others rather than making more and more for ourselves, we tend to experience a much greater sense of well-being. And that is something that is very key. We feel best, we feel most like ourselves, we feel most like a human being when we are actually using our resources on others and not necessarily ourselves. Definitely could be something that can be taken too far, but there easily is a way to bring it into everyday life just to create that sense of well-being, lasting well-being, and good outcomes that come from something authentic. Research has done that shows that one of the most important predictors, if not the most important predictor in marriage of satisfaction and stability, is the extent to which the married partners are kind to each other. So kindness is relatively simple. Kindness is firstly based on the very important principle of do no harm. An ancient principle that goes back to Hippocrates, the doctor, and further back than that. It is as much a spiritual principle as it is a physical principle. Do no harm. it is a fundamental idea behind much of the yogas and the yogic practices, such as vegetarianism, caring for the environment, and so on. Those things are based on a very fundamental principle of do no harm. So kindness is not something that is difficult to do. If it arises out of doing no harm, it's something that is relatively easy to do. Importantly, and what we've learned from the studies I mentioned and many more, kindness affects the person who does it as much as it affects the person who receives it, and tends to have a very lasting impression on both of them. Certainly the recipient, as we know, if you've ever received an act of kindness, it's likely that you still remember it. It's likely that you might remember it even if it is from decades ago. So it has a very powerful effect on us. Actually, psychologists suggest that it even influences the giver of the kindness even more than the receiver of the kindness. So it leaves the giver with greater mental, emotional, and physical well-being. And fundamentally, it involves judging less, even if you're in a situation where you think judgment is appropriate. Whether it's not judging or whatever other behavior you kind of might have been about to do, the first step in learning to be kinder is to ask yourself, how would I feel if I was on the receiving end of that behavior? And if it doesn't feel like that would be good, don't do it or don't say it to the other person, which would cause them to experience that or feel that. So one of the things that's so important, and which many of the spiritual and personal teachers tell us about kindness, is that no matter what the situation really is, no matter what the situation is that is kind of just about to provoke a response from you or an action from you that might not be kind, that might even be unkind, the important thing is to hold on to the difference between what a person does and what they're probably meant to do. So maybe there are actions that actually stem from an intention to do harm, and I'll get back to those. But most of the time, if we look at what did they do versus what did they probably try and do, or what did they say versus what they obviously were trying to say but got it so wrong. You know, we have such a strong instinct to jump on that and play a word game and win an argument. But if we ask ourselves, what did they really mean to say, we can often say something much kinder in return. But even if it goes further than that, even if they actually do say something harmful and hurtful, and our instinct is to do the same in return. Think about this. Usually, if someone says something harmful or hurtful, they are lashing out. They are in some kind of pain. They are in some kind of inadequacy or insecurity or something like that. They are being hurtful because they feel hurt. So saying something hurtful in return only escalates the situation. It becomes a game or a war or a game of kind of one-upmanship that still ultimately doesn't achieve anything except to escalate hurt and pain. So why do that? If we understand that they are hurt, and that's probably why they're doing that, it will just hurt them more, and that's why it escalates the situation. So rather say something kind. Rather try and act in a kind way in return. I mean, at the very least, don't say anything back. But try and say something kind in return. You know, it would possibly disarm them, but that's not what you're really trying to do. It's that you will actually shift their experience. You will shift their feeling of pain immediately. You will see the result immediately. You will see them shift or feel better, and you will. And that's the point about kindness. It has an immediate beneficial effect on both the giver and the receiver. And weighing that up against the importance of winning an argument or being right or not letting them say that or any of that kind of stuff Well, it's likely that a positive experience that is authentic is something which can benefit and grow two people in the situation. That easily outweighs a situation that is fraught with pain or argument or, in the end, even possibly regret. Regret is the opposite of gain. So, kindness is an action that benefits and grows the giver and the receiver of it. Some people would say, well, kindness, might be an effort to accumulate good feedback. It might be self-serving. It might even sometimes try and make the recipient feel indebted in some way. So maybe sometimes we need to consider ourselves and consider, are we expecting some kind of a payback? And if we're expecting some kind of a payback, were we really being kind? Take it even further and find yourself sometimes saying, I was so kind to them and look how they treat me now. Well, turns out that maybe your kindness has been expecting something in return. And is that really a kindness after all? So maybe the first place to start with kindness is kindness to ourselves. Learning to be kind to ourselves when we do something wrong. Learning to not beat ourselves up and cause more pain or more anger or often just more stress and disappointment when we berate ourselves or beat ourselves up or even just sling a few curse words around, because it's all directing it outside of us. In fact, very commonly, when we feel frustrated or hurt or we think we did something wrong, we do what I just said about painful person. It's now us. We lash out. So sometimes we say something upsetting to someone else because it makes us feel a bit better. And then after that, no one feels better. And then even a little bit later after that, everyone feels terrible. Again, weigh that up against a simple act of kindness, even if you were dying to get revenge, and the rapid good results are so strong that it can dramatically change everything. So we can start shifting how we look at the world and how we notice the world. Learning to notice when other people are experiencing some kind of difficulty, whether they're suffering or whether they're struggling with something, and even if it's something small, like picking something up, let alone some big issue of life. If you start doing that, basically it becomes so easy. If you actually begin to see opportunities everywhere to help someone, especially a stranger in an ordinary situation, or pretty much anyone else. Small acts of kindness, and a neighbor walking along who needs some help, or someone who's trying to carry something, or importantly, here in South Africa and probably many places in the world, it's not long before we're going to see a homeless person or a person who's really, really struggling to find a meal or find some shelter. Giving a meal, or if you've got a spare blanket, but even just popping into the store and buying someone something to eat can make an enormous amount of difference in somebody's life. And of course, shift your sense, not of I'm fantastic, of what's important, what's beneficial to us all. Remember Darwin's point that we're social creatures. The point is that when we act in our common benefit, that's when we feel the best and experience the best. If we act in our own benefit, there's a problem. If we act only in the benefit of others, it's dubious and potentially problematical. If we act in our common benefit, that's the point of kindness. And the more you look around, the more you will see opportunities. One of the other best opportunities is celebrating someone else, encouraging their success, being happy at other people's success, being happy at almost anything good for another person. And especially in your personal relationships, making sure you don't do things to undercut or undermine the success, to feel like you in competition. You know how easy it is to do that? When your partner says something amazing that they did, or something that they succeeded at, especially when there are other people around, and so you respond by saying something amazing that you did. That is undermining or undercutting it. Rather put aside what you wanted to say about your success and celebrate theirs. And you'll feel as happy as if it's yours anyway. And the point is that it's our mutual benefit. So learning to not minimize anything that's beneficial to someone you love, and learning to maximize all the good stuff for those that you love and for anyone else as well. Not only is it easy to do and easy to feel the mutual benefit, but kindness is contagious. It really is by its own nature. If someone is kind to us, it tends to encourage us to be kind to someone else. I mean, you've probably heard about things like Pay It Forward, which was the name of a movie inspired by an earlier idea about passing on kindness. It naturally does inspire us, and we want to pass on kindness, and it very quickly spreads. If someone is kind to you, and so you end up being kind to someone else, then now two people have been kind too, and it starts spreading around very rapidly, and eventually it causes more than the idea of the common good to two people, but to lots of people, most of whom you don't even know about. But that is performing a much deeper function as a human being of what's good for us all, and what grows us all grows me too. But acting unselfishly is how I get the gain, not by thinking about what's in it for me. Oli Waba also called it Boomerang Kindness, that what also sometimes happens is that you find yourself in a situation where a little bit of kindness towards you would go a long way. And it comes because of the boomerang effect of kindness being spread around. It often ends up coming back to you at the most serendipitous moment anyway. Again, the point is not to get anything in return. It just is the nature of kindness that it spreads very easily and it boomerangs back very easily. It's a naturally contagious kind of process. Oli Waba, whose videos you should maybe watch on TED Talk sometimes, Oli Waba actually created little cards of random acts of kindness that she would pass around. So her way of doing it is to creating, I guess, a set of cards called Random Acts of Kindness that suggested a random act of kindness on it, and then you give it to someone who will do that and pass on that card. So that's a different way of doing it that deliberately inspires others to pay it forward in some way. But it's really a question of identifying small things. If she says those kind of things, paying it forward, random acts of kindness, if you find that it doesn't come naturally to you to do that, or doesn't come easily to do that, try and find just one small thing to do for someone, anyone, every day. Just one. It can be noticeable, unnoticeable. And learn to observe the impact on yourself. She says, ask yourself and notice, does it become easier to perform the acts of kindness the more often you do them? Do you begin to notice more opportunities to act in a kind fashion? Because you will. So that's what you're going to observe. As you do small acts of kindness, they generate more opportunities to find acts of kindness. They generate more acts of kindness themselves. And then she says, observe yourself further. Do you begin to feel a little lighter? Do you begin to feel a little bit different? I mean, do you begin to feel like a kinder person? And that in itself is contagious, because as you begin to perceive yourself as more capable of kindness, you begin to let go of a lot of the frustrations and the stresses and difficulties. You begin to learn new ways to respond to things. Again, I do want to emphasize that it's not the same as simply positive thinking, which really disappoints us more often than it benefits us. It's actually doing something. Kindness is an act that makes a giver and a receiver and makes them both better because of it. So it's not an empty or idealistic thing. It's actually something you can physically do. And because it only has to be a small thing, it's something as accessible as positive thinking, but much more effective. So we can actually learn to be more kind. Once we've broken the ice with ourselves and learn to see ourselves as capable of it, learn to see little things, we can begin to develop the best opportunities. So here are a few ideas of things that we can look out for that help us develop kindness. How to notice the world that way. Firstly, the one I've spoken about the most is learning to ask if you can help. That's something that does come easily to many people, and kind of we were brought up that way. So I don't mean in the everyday sense, or maybe we include that, asking to help lay the table is always going to be helpful, but especially in a situation where someone needs help and isn't expecting it. In other words, a stranger. Asking where you can help, even with something small. Just, can I help you carry that? Or something like that. That's an important thing as well. And also learning to put yourself in other people's shoes. Not only to ask yourself the question, how would I feel if someone did that to me, but just how would I feel if I was that person? And when you see a person in need, or a person who has little, or a person who's struggling or suffering or anything, and ask yourself, how would I feel to be that person? Even if you see a person who's alone. I saw an amazing little kindness video, I think it was probably on Instagram recently, of some people in a queue at a restaurant filmed. A young guy in a restaurant eating alone saw a woman in the queue waiting to eat, who was clearly on her own as well. And the restaurant was allocating tables according to group sizes. A person dining alone was waiting very long for a table. So he went over and called her and asked her to please join him, because he was dining alone. And they just sat at the table, two people just eating and occasionally chatting as if they even knew each other. And it was a small act of kindness that probably completely transformed her life. Certainly did, even if he wasn't thinking about for him. And everyone in the queue will go home and will probably, most of them will want to do something, or the next time they see someone alone in a restaurant will remember that and very likely do something. Kindness is not only contagious, it's almost like a virus. It just spreads the minute you give it half a chance. And then looking for those opportunities is something that becomes very easy to do. So kindness to strangers. A more fundamental kindness is forgiveness. So forgiving in any situation, forgiving yourself and forgiving others. Putting yourself in their shoes can often be a way to do that. But really forgive them no matter what. Sometimes might be challenging. Forgiveness is a big thing. We've spoken about it separately on the show before. But forgiving no matter what, even if you have a justifiable issue or criticism, forgiving no matter what, a very powerful form of kindness. And then also being kind to someone very close to you, because we often take them for granted. We often treat our loved ones with less respect than we treat strangers. Just because it's old habit, we know them so well, and especially people like parents or people like siblings. So, relationships that are given no matter what. So, being kind to someone close to you, deliberately, forgiving someone close to you. There's a simple kindness we can all do. It's letting someone in the line. Do it in your car. Do the opposite of road rage. Do road kindness. It really changes everything. If you let someone in, you can watch this happen yourself. If you let someone in with your car, chances are they're going to let someone else in. Calms everyone down and slows everyone down and relaxes everyone. And that's what changes the whole point. The thing that I started with was by saying the stresses and strains and unhappinesses and angers and pains that are all related can be changed by one simple act. And do it in a queue and you'll see it happen down the line. Do it in your life and it'll happen down the line. Do it to another person and it'll happen down the line. The world will be changed in many ways after this pandemic. Economic ways and political ways we can be sure of, and hope for the best, but one of the ways we can ensure the best is by ensuring that we continue more than ever to practice kindness. Don't forget, wear a mask when you go out, and I will see you